Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Guess what? I want to bring up the subject of war, but the big decision is which war should we talk about? The one in particular that I want to catch up on and let our listeners know what we've been thinking about what's going on in Ukraine. But it was been brought to our attention by, a website that I think a lot of, and that's Zero Hedge. And they had a report there that dissected out the emails. And, emails are really important when you can find them. But evidently, they've been releasing their emails between Poroshenko, the so-called president of Ukraine, as well as Soros. And I thought, well, this is pretty fascinating that this happens. But here it turns out that Soros has a lot of investment, probably financial, political, and everything else, in a lot of areas of the world and a lot of financial markets. So he's very, very much engaged in this, and he has access to Poroshenko. But guess what? In this discussion, it looks like he has pretty easy access to Jack Lew, our Secretary of Treasury. Would you have ever guessed?
Well, having a few $1 billion lying around, I guess, buys a lot of access.
Right. Well, anyway, he's angling to try to get this thing organized. He says it's very, very important to get control of things. Of course, we know that there's been a revolution going on there for a year and a half, and the elected leader was thrown out by the European leaders along with America's help. But the problem is debt. And who's going to get stuck with it? It's not too much unlike with the problem that the Europeans are facing, including the United States, because we have banks over there, with Greece. And it's not like they're expecting Greece or the Ukraine ever to get rich all of a sudden and start paying their bills. It's who's going to get stuck with the bad debt. And, according to this record, Soros has some plans. He wants our Fed to get involved, promise him $15 billion to start. He wants the IMF involved, which further, indebts our people. So the debt is not going to be paid. It's going to be transferred, just as the debt in our 2008 and 2009 crisis got transferred to the American people through the monetizing of this debt and dumped on the taxpayers. But there's a lot of politicking going on right now and a lot of accusations, and I think Soros has a precise position on what we should do with our weaponry.
Yeah, it's interesting because Zero Hedge had a great line. It said, these were hacked emails between Soros and Poroshenko. They said that these hacked emails show that conspiracy theory is conspiracy fact.
There you go.
He was conspiring, and he's been pushing very hard for not only the financial support from the EU and from the U.S., but he's also pushing very hard behind the scenes for the U.S. to send weapons to the Western Ukrainians to fight the East, So that really is, coming right up against the Minsk agreements, which were supposed to be a ceasefire agreement. So he's pushing for more weapons. And as we very well know, the U.S. has military trainers, and they're training the Army in the West as well.
Yeah, but they don't like the idea because it was big news. That nobody talks in our media about how many people we have there and how much money's been involved and how we participated in the coup. But there was a charge made the other day about there were four Russians, or was it 2 Russians? Just a couple Russians. They were found in eastern Ukraine. So should that be a shock to us that might happen?
But I think what a lot of Americans may not realize is that before 1991, there essentially were no borders in that area. And the fact is that eastern Ukraine is predominantly ethnic Russian. So you do have a situation where people, family members and friends were in very close proximity, and now there's a border between the two. And, the U.S. side has been claiming a Russian invasion for a number of months now without any evidence. But the Russians have said there probably are soldiers that have gone over there to fight on their own time, and that shouldn't really be a surprise.
Right, and the West, the official government has retaliated, and militarily they've had, I guess, a bit of success, but it's just going to aggravate the situation, expand the war, because they have killed a few people just recently because they claim that these Russians are going to do such and such. But, my beef isn't that the Russians are perfect, and we know who does what. My beef is, why are we involved? And why do we have a guy like Soros, who's very, very powerful financially, who wants him, I'm sure he wants bailed out. He wants involvement. He's involved in so many things. It wasn't too long ago where he was talking about China. And unless, and he said, you know, unless our government and our administrations really have a tough line against China, we're going to have a third world war. And it's that kind of thing that I don't like, and the only thing that we ethically and constitutionally could argue about is trying to talk our government out of doing things that they shouldn't do. And we can talk about what we think about the factions there to further explain it, you know, for theoretical reasons. But I don't think that we need to be put in the position that we have to explain every single thing, even though I think academically it deserves a recognition of how long Russia's been there and why they were involved with Crimea for a long time. So,
and why they might be interested in it, and why they, you know, by measure of proximity, you know, should be. But you know where else Soros is active? And the interesting thing about George Soros's philanthropy is it always tracks U.S. foreign policy. He never supports an organization or a government that the U.S. government doesn't support. But you know, he's been very active in Macedonia lately, and we talked about this a while ago.
Right. That
there's a coup that's being fomented under the surface, and all of these NGOs are financed. You even look at the bottom of their website; it'll say financed by USAID and George Soros, and they're the ones pushing for a regime change. The reason why the U.S. wants it, I think you know that, is the pipeline, the Turk Stream pipeline. The U.S. does not want Russian oil to get to Western Europe.
Well,
or Russian gas, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and pipelines are involved with Syria, and it's always, you know, natural resources, oil and gas, and they have no confidence and no belief that if we followed some rules of a free market and a free society, that things would be distributed rather well. But what would that do? It would diminish the power and authority of a few thugs. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have a few of those in Washington too, because my argument has always been that the differences between the two parties aren't all that great. It's a matter of who gets to control things, but most of them are supportive of very similar ideas. You didn't see very strong opposition by the Republicans to the Patriot Act. Mm-hmm. You know, the Patriot Act gets renewed, and according to our understanding, it's probably a lot worse. Yeah. And yet, you even have guys like McConnell saying that he wanted it stronger and stronger, and you know, but they went along with reform. So once you talk about reform, whether it's a monetary policy, whether it has to do with our civil liberties, or whether it has to do with war, all these coalitions built, doesn't really help us at all.
You know, I was going to ask you, because one of the things that was in these hacked emails is Soros really pushing the EU to give Greece a few $1 billion. But, you know, we've both been following, not Greece, I'm sorry, Ukraine. That's my question, I gave it away. But you know, with all of this to do about Greece being in such bad shape, what do you think the chance would be that they'd come up with a few billion for Ukraine?
I think they're very good. And even though we've been back and forth, and the markets react, one day, they're going to default, and the next day they're going to get bailed out, they'll get bailed out. It's sort of like the situation domestically after '09. I was quite confident that the banks would be bailed out, and quite confident Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would be bailed out, and the big corporations would not fail, and General Motors would be government motors, because the pain that they would see to their power structure by allowing a natural consequence, which is necessary, and that is the liquidation of debt. They're not going to permit this. So it's only, they're fussing and fuming over who gets stuck with the bills, and it is complex. You have the Russians now. One of Soros's complaints was, you know, if we don't really stand up to China, they might build a coalition with the Russians and the Indians and Syria and a few other places in Iran. Of course they will, because it's in their interest to do this. But no, the debt will not be paid. One way or the other is going to be transferred. Soros is not going to go bankrupt, and Soros will be in charge, and it's still sends a powerful message when you get a guy like Soros, who is non-government. He's a non-government organization who can talk to Poroshenko. He probably knew exactly what was going on with the overthrow of the elected leader, as well as his inside track to the IMF and to Jack Lew at Treasury. And the only thing that holds this system together, whether it's the European Union, whether it's Greece, or whether it's Ukraine, all these things are only held together by one thing, and that is the perception that the dollar is still a strong currency. This is why Soros is so adamant. We got to get control of this. We have to protect the dollars. He's probably not invested in renminbi, you know, the Chinese currency. He's probably not investing in that. He's invested in dollars, and that's why I fear if you don't do what I tell you, and we don't have control of the finances of Ukraine, not only will it be a financial crisis, it could be World War III coming. And I consider him a fearmonger, a very dangerous person as far as stirring the pot. And on the short term, the biggest thing is send more weapons. And you know, whether it's Ukraine or Syria, we have too many in Washington who like that idea. Because believe it or not, there's a lot of people in Congress who have been influenced by the military and industrial complex. Can you believe anything like that? Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.